No matter how good you are and how much you study with solvers, your edge against the regulars at your limit will probably never exceed 8 big blinds per 100. But when playing against fish with a lose rate of -40 BB or higher, mastering your game against them could give you a double-digit edge, all while spending significantly less time studying. This is Jayser 1337 for GTO Wizard, and today we'll reveal the magic behind exploiting recreational players. We will start with an introduction, then explore two loose-aggressive fish profiles, including the toughest one of all, and discuss Preflop and Postflop Exploits against them. We'll also briefly go through some other common fish profiles and outline the basic adjustments against them. In the end, I will demonstrate some universal tendencies and the decision-making process that can be applied to any profile. The materials used in this video are the results of many years of my experience in online high-stakes games, plus the massive data analysis based on 20 million hands played by recreational players from NL100 to NL5K. The data helped identify the 7 main fish profiles, analyze their weaknesses, and learn how to build maximum exploits against each of them. Knowing the typical adjustments and exploits based on data could give us a huge edge, but it wouldn't be possible without precise fish profiling in the first place. Let's look at the following profiles. Pause this video for a moment and think how you would play against these two recreational players. Would you notice any difference while multi-tabling and having two opponents like this? Now let's reveal more information about them. On the left, you can see the aggressive station type or the piranha. On the right, the aggressive folding type or the moray eel. Even though these two players have very similar betting and raising tendencies, their play as a caller is quite different. The piranhas bite into the pot and don't let go easily. There are almost no spots in the game where they overfold and can be pushed off the pot easily. Compare them to moray eels, who are more cautious without the initiative and fold much more, especially on the river. To correctly identify whether the loose aggressive fish at our table is a station or a folding one, we must 1. The number one priority is to watch the showdowns to notice how widely they call. 2. Pay attention to timing tells. Here is one example. If they tank the full time bank and fold, we learn nothing, but if they make a quick call with a marginal bluff catcher, we can mark them as likely aggressive stations. 3. We should not rely on stats too much unless we've played thousands of hands with them. Consider these hands played by typical moray eels who folded and showed their hand, and ask yourself whether you would expect such folds from somebody as loose and aggressive. First hand we have pocket nines calling 3-bet, check call flop, check call turn, and then fold against a river shove with a 4th set. Then we have king queen off, flop in 2 pairs, c-betting flop, double barreling turn, betting pot on a river, and folding against a check raise and showing our hand. Lastly, we have ace queen off, calling 3-bet under the gun, in position, calling flop, calling turn, and then with a top pair and top kicker against 3/4 river bet, we just fold. Even one showdown like this is enough to confirm that our opponent is a folding one. These aggressive folding fish are the toughest profile to play against. Let's consider our preflop strategy against loose aggressive types when we have no initiative. How wide should we call, 3-bet or 4-bet against their raises? When building our preflop range against any opponent, a few factors defined our strategy. Size, frequency and composition of the open raise, effective stack size, whether we get paid off when we hit something, relative positions, are we in position or out of position, are there other players behind, and equity realization, defined by our postflop skill. Against regulars, we have the calculated GTO ranges that take all these factors into account. But what about playing against fish? There is no calculated static GTO here because their preflop ranges depend on their profile and current tilt level. Our postflop edge is much higher, meaning that the equity realization of our hands will increase and allow us to play even wider ranges. To what extent? Well, it depends on how confident we are playing with wider ranges, the quality of our reads, our understanding of fish profiles, and the knowledge of how to exploit them. Here are the opening ranges of loose-aggressive fish. They tend to play very loosely from early positions, opening 32% under the gun at a 6-max table, while defending very wide against 3-bets. With the help of GTO Wizard, we will build effective preflop strategies in a few simple steps. In GTO Wizard, we go to Change, Custom Solutions, New Solution, and go to Preflop, use the settings, make sure to add 0.25 ante in BB per player so we get the right pot odds. And remember that small blind is player in position and big blind is player out of position. Then we click on Create the Solution and go to a node locking option. Here we must select 32% opening range. We can do that by entering 32% here and then entering folding range again to get rid of these small errors. Now, one more thing to correct is the range itself, because according to data, fish prefers to open suited connectors and off-suited aces. So let's edit this range a little bit. Okay, now it looks more realistic. We go to Lock All and click Node Lock. The big blind reaction is to 3-bet using a big polar size. However, we must remember that our opponent is going to call much wider than GTO, so we must take it into account. We go to Node Lock. As we know, average loose-aggressive fish calls around 66% in this position. However, because we will use a bigger size, 3-betting them, we can lower their defense frequency to around 50, maybe 55%. So let's select a realistic range first. Once we have entered their calling range against 3-bets and 4-betting range, we go to Lock All and Node Lock option again. We go back to big blind strategy. As you can see, our strategy has changed. Now with 3-bet, more dipolar strategy. However, it is still not perfect and there are things to be adjusted. Keep in mind that we play against fish and we don't need to balance, we don't need to be unexploitable. We want to pretty much max exploit them. Therefore, we can 3-bet all of our hands that seem like a pure value 3-bets and then never 3-bet the bottom of our range that is here only because the strategy was built against the solver who would exploit us if we are not balanced and if we deviate from the GTO. Because we play against the fish, our equity realization is going to be so much better. We can call even wider if we have some additional reads and can outplay our opponent post-flop even more. And vice versa, if we play against somebody very aggressive who barrels a lot, then the bottom of our range is not going to play that good and we can just fold those in different hands. Our final 3-betting strategy out of position is very depolarized and consists of our best hands. As for in-position 3-bets, the logic is quite different. Here we want to 3-bet using a smaller size with as wide range as we can because our goal is to play as many pots against fish for a cheap price as possible. In the most common lines, when our villain open raises preflop in position and then c-bets on the flop, turn or river, there are no obvious weaknesses to be attacked except for the lowest sizes being slightly weaker. But even there, we don't really enjoy any overfolds unless we go for a check raise plus multi-street bluff. They don't overfold against check raise or check raise plus barreling on any street either, defending about right. So, how do we exploit them? The fun stuff happens when they check on the flop as an aggressor, especially in the single raise pots. They seem to severely underprotect their check-in behind range and then overfold on the later streets against the specific sets of sizes. The lower the board, the weaker their check-behind range, and the more we can attack it, taking into account the turn out, of course. On the left table in the frequency percentage field, you can see their folding frequency by different board types. We can enjoy enough fold equity pretty much on any river except for ace-high boards or when the ace comes on the turn or the river because their check-in behind range has too many ace-highs. On the right table is their play after the flop in position check-back. The fold equity highly depends on our turn probe and river bet size. For example, in the first row, you can see check and then fold against 33% bet. The fold is 25% only, which is very low, which means that we shouldn't ever bluff one street only with a block bet size. If we bet 75% on the turn, they tend to fold 46, which is about right. And against pot bet or higher, they seem to fold 64, which seems like a slightly overfold. Here we can consider a different set of turn plus river bet sizes and the fold equity they create. Keeping this in mind, we want to split our bluffs into a few different sizes to maximize our fold equity. As a one-street bluff, the only size that enjoys a decent 64% overfold is the pot bet plus. For this reason, we can bluff bet once with around 110% size with weak bluffs like 1 or 2 overcards. Overbet 150 to 200% with nut flush draws and monster draws to maximize fold equity now and give up on most rivers because of bad blockers. Bet 3/4 turn with gut shots, open-enders and non-nut flush draws to inflate the pot on the turn while having decent draw equity, then take it down on the river by overbetting around 125%. Bet 1/3 on the turn with the weakest hands like 2 undercards, for example 10-9 at King 8 do 3 board, with the plan to overbet bluff on blanks or bet 3/4 on flush closing rivers if we have a blocker. Let's consider a couple of other lines where we can gain extra EV. Both bet check bet and check check bet lines seem to be severely overbluffed with a clear tendency. The lower the size, the weaker it is. Besides bluff catching rivers as wide as possible, our adjustment should be to check call more often instead of block betting once we get checked on the turn when we are out of position on the river. For example, we call in the big blind against the moray eel on the bottom, single raise pot, board is queen 7-5 the flush draw. We check call on the flop, the turn goes check check, and on the river we are faced with a decision. Should we bet or check, and what size should we use with different hands? We have the range advantage and want to attack a big part of our opponent's range that consists of the worst hands like weak pairs and ace highs. The solver suggests using a block bet as the main size to value bet second pairs and the best under pairs, and then 3/4 or higher for our top pairs or better. But what if we not lock the river strategy according to the data that tells us about the massive overbluffs by the loose aggressive fish? Let's go back to strategy, select not lock, go to set strategy, and here to see what happens, let's increase the river bluff frequency with the no-mate hands, ace highs and king highs to 40% and leave the weak pairs as they are. On some runouts, these weak pairs can be considered thin value bets, while on others they are clear bluffs. Now we select lock all and not lock. Now the block bet size that was used for our medium hands is gone, and all those hands become much more profitable in check calling against the overbluffs. Compare the EV of hands like ace 7 or king 7. The check EV is 7.61, while block betting is only 7.19. That's a big EV loss. We should only start adding block bets to our arsenal when our villain is very aggressive postflop and can be provoked into raising by these smaller bets. Same logic can be applied when the action goes check-check up to the river. We can see massive overbluffs that increase as the bet size decreases. The only underbluff check-check bet happens after the 4 straight turns. Seems like they intuitively prefer to underbluff here. Another interesting find is their play in 3-bet pots as caller out of position on the flop. On the flop, there is no fold equity against the 33% c-bet, plus we risk getting check raised almost twice more often compared to when we bet 75%. A block bet is definitely not something we want to do with our bluffs, especially the vulnerable ones like 2 backdoor flush draw equity type of hands. Here we can follow the same logic that we applied in our turn prop strategy to exploit their reaction against different sets of sizes. Pause this video for a moment and let me know in the comments how would you build your max exploit strategy as a 3-better in position given this info. To finish with the loose-aggressive types, here is another interesting discovery. Even though the VPAP, PFR, and aggression frequency thresholds used in the expression stats were the same for both profiles, there seems to be a correlation between their calling and bluffing tendencies. The higher the bluffing frequency of a loose-aggressive player, the more they seem to bluff catch themselves. The piranhas tend to overbluff noticeably more almost in every line compared to the moray eels. Keep this notion in mind when bluff catching against them. Imagine that we used only basic criteria like VPAP and PFR for profile creation. We would have missed these important aspects and the value that comes with it. To get as precise profiles as possible, every profile was designed with a set of hand-to-node expression stats that also include aggression frequency, calling and folding tendencies, and loss rates. Since you've already met the loose-aggressive inhabitants, let me introduce other fish profiles without going too much into detail. Meet the passive calling station or the puffer fish. They don't raise much preflop, have low postflop aggression frequencies, and call down too much, given how wide their preflop ranges are. And their less courageous passive folding friend, the flounder, who also plays a wide range preflop, but then overfolds on the turn and the river and doesn't like to bluff catch at all. The flounder has a distant relative, a very boring to play against tight and passive semi-fish, or the tadpole. Tadpoles play similarly but make fewer mistakes. We can treat them the same way we treat loose passive fish, while keeping in mind that these guys are a bit tighter and make fewer mistakes. If a tadpole is the only recreational player at your table, you might consider changing it because their loss rate might not cover the rake you pay, especially in a high rake environment. On the top of our menu, there are two rare and very important fish. One is a passive VIP, or the whale. These players have a VPIP of 60% or higher and a preflop raise percentage under 12. They exhibit relatively low postflop aggression and a very high win to showdown percentage. When they have at least something, they tend to pay very generously. The other VIP is his adventurous and very aggressive buddy, the clownfish. With a preflop raise of 20% or higher, these players are much more aggressive preflop. They also apply a lot of pressure postflop, fighting for pots, calling down very lightly, spewing chips left and right. An average loss rate of minus 86 EVBB per 100 makes them the most welcome guest at the table. Basic adjustments. Against the passive stations, on the flop, in position, out of position, do not automatically check medium hands. Don't be afraid to block bet in position with a weak range on any street. There is always at least some fold equity. Check behind weak draws more often on the turn in position, given there is not enough fold equity on the river, and don't bluff enough versus missed c-bet. Play max exploit with multiple sizes on every street. Do not balance. Versus the passive folding fish. Isolate with a very wide range and a slightly bigger size. Actively bluff barrel. Increase your sizing with bluffs for extra fold equity. Versus lose aggressive. Provoke. With a value hand, try to make his bet the last one. Let him do the bluffing. With a strong draw in a medium-sized pot, try to make your bet the last. For example, in 3-bet or 4-bet pots, if you have a strong equity hands, consider shoving yourself so you don't get reshoved with a weaker hand. Bluff catch much wider against most lines. The more often they bet against our checks, the more we want to check raise instead of betting ourselves. Or the more they pro-bet, the more we want to check back our weaker hands in position and then bluff catch turns and rivers. Lastly, I've built these custom stats to find the correlation between the set of sizes and the strength of the range. Even though each profile has its own tendencies, most of them do share some common patterns. Here we will only consider the in-position play in single raise pots by the fish. Highlighted in orange, you can see the bet sizing tendencies on the turn for all profiles together. For instance, at the top, it shows the range composition on the turn if the flop c-bet size was between 33 and 50%, and then the turn c-bet size increased. This part is not very useful for studying universal tendencies because turn range composition varies significantly between different profiles. The pufferfish would not bluff nearly as much as the piranha or the clownfish. The river part highlighted in red is more useful because, regardless of the profile, recreational players tend to think similarly while reading different boards following similar human biases. Consider the first example at the top with the increasing c-bet size on each street. When the turn and river are both blanks, it's a universal spot for underbluffing with only 26% of weak hands in the third barrel when its size is rarely lower than 3/4. An even better example, if the bet size increases on every street and the river card completes the flush, expect a big underbluff from any recreational player you face. Interestingly, if the flush was completed on the turn and they barrel the river with an increased size, they seem to overbluff, likely due to having too many intuitive bluffs with a suited card on the turn and then not giving up enough on the river. In contrast, if the turn was a blank on a flush draw board, they lack enough bluffs, being too flush draw heavy in their turn barrel. Remember, while we can divide the most common types of fish into the profiles and identify the shared patterns, each profile has its flaws and misses out some individual nuances. Each recreational player is an individual with his own whims that should be identified and exploited if you want to maximize your edge. Your decision-making process should go as follows. First, rely on individual reads. The second most important thing is logic. If your opponent represents nothing by taking a weird line, chances are they have nothing, but not always. Refer back to the individual reads. Then consider profile reads. Studying each profile meticulously and identifying them correctly can give you a massive edge against any recreational player. Timing tells can help with your decision a lot, but their accuracy is not perfect. Stats are the least important because we rarely have played enough hands against a given fish, and trusting low sample data could be very misleading. If unsure, it's better to ignore the data than fall prey to a fallacy. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments. Signing out!